Straight Shift with the Car Chick, the podcast that's all about cars, buying, selling, fixing, and driving, and sometimes running fast if you're the Car Chick. Now, here she is.
Welcome, everyone, to the Straight Shift. Today, we're going to talk about what to expect as your car ages. Cars do, in fact, age, just like people. It's a fact of life. Yet, I'm always amazed at how many people, take their 7-8-year-old car into their mechanic for an oil change, and then they're shocked and appalled when the mechanic hands them a quote for a hefty repair bill saying, hey, your car needs all of these things done to it. And sometimes people are buying an older car, maybe because they have a smaller budget for a car, or maybe they're buying a car for their teenager. That's something that I do a lot for my clients. And maybe they just like the retro look of some of the slightly older cars. And when I talk about an older car, I'm really talking about just something that's maybe 7+ years old. But when people buy a car that is of a certain age or older, then they're shocked and angry when they have to dump a ton of money into it just a few months after the purchase. Even if they did what I tell them to and get a pre-purchase inspection on said used car by a qualified mechanic, and maybe the inspection checks out just fine at the time, but that doesn't mean that there aren't going to be repairs down the road. So today I want to talk about what should you really expect over the years with your car or of a car that you may be purchasing on the secondary market that is of a certain age. And then after the break, we're going to talk also about what of your driving and car care behaviors might actually be contributing to the premature aging of your car. So let's get started. In the first 1 to 3 years of your car's life, that's typically when it's still under the factory warranty, really nothing should go wrong. Now, that being said, there are a boatload of recalls that are issued on just about every single make and model. Even Honda is not immune to having some problems initially, especially now that cars are so technology heavy. You have as many computers in your car as you do mechanical moving parts. And a lot of that newer technology is still, kind of on the bleeding edge. So we're seeing some recalls. We're seeing some recalls because a lot of the parts for cars are starting to be sourced out of China and Malaysia and other countries that may not have the strict quality standards that at least those of us that drive Japanese cars have become accustomed to. But in the first 1 to 3 years of your car's life, really all you should have to do to it is the regularly scheduled basic maintenance. I am talking your regular oil changes, maybe some other fluid changes, your tire rotations, air filters, maybe some new windshield wipers. Obviously, all of this depends on how many miles you put on your car in a year. We have the extreme of I have several clients who are in sales or real estate, and they're driving 25,000 miles a year. Obviously, their car is going to age faster. Let me take a second and clarify what I mean about car aging. There are two things that contribute to the aging of your car: the actual year of your car as the years pass, and the mileage. Depending on where in the country you live, the year and the actual passage of time on the calendar has a greater impact. Down here in the South, where we don't typically have that season known as winter, we have just, a month or so where it gets a little bit cold and we all hate it, and then, it's 90 degrees again. But in places that actually have winter, where they have inclement weather and that nasty stuff called snow, they salt the roads on a regular basis. That salt gets up into the cars and starts corroding everything, and you get rust. This is why I never buy northern cars for my clients, really, no matter what, because that ages the car so much faster. Mileage is the other thing that ages your car, and that can age it more than just the passing of calendar years, especially here in the South. And if you drive a lot of miles, if you put 20, 25,000 miles a year on your car, it is going to age faster, and you are going to have to be much more meticulous about your maintenance in order to keep it in good shape so that it ages gracefully. On the other extreme, you have people like my mother who is retired, and if she puts 3 or 4,000 miles on her car every year, I'm shocked. So her car is aging faster through the calendar year passing of time than it is on the miles that she is now putting on it. Yeah, the same is kind of true for people, right? The passing of time, each time we have a birthday, we do get older. That puts wear and tear on our bodies. But the way we take care of our bodies, kind of the mileage and the type of miles we put on our bodies can obviously make a big difference too. So I'm going to be using a lot of analogies between cars and humans through this because I think it's something that people can relate to. Certainly the aging part. So in 1 to 3 years, just do your basic maintenance. It's mostly going to be the little stuff that doesn't cost an arm and a leg. And this is just one of the things that you need to do starting right away with your car so that it does age gracefully. This is the preventative maintenance that I cannot stress how important that is. You might even need, new brakes and tires if you put a lot of miles on your car in those first 3 years, but it should be reasonable. This is why a lot of people like to lease, because every 3 years they just get a new car and they never get into the more expensive maintenance and repair items. Now they're making a monthly car payment, for the rest of their lives. But for some people, that is a lifestyle choice that works for their lifestyle, and there is nothing wrong with that. As your car hits kind of the 5 to 7 year mark, this is when your car starts to get, it's sort of like when we hit our 30s. This is when you start to feel some things, your 30s, your 40s, you start to notice some stuff, right? I'm trying to think, I was probably maybe 32 or 33 when I started feeling a little bit of creakiness in my knees. Granted, I was a figure skater for many years, so that put a lot more wear and tear on my body. But your car's going to start feeling some of the similar things. In the 5 to 7 year mark, depending on the mileage, you may start to see some wear in your suspension components, wheel bearings, ball joints, tie rods, CV axles, etc. They may start to show some wear, what your mechanic may call some play, meaning that there's some wiggle room in there that wasn't supposed to be there. And when that happens, when you start getting that play, that wiggle room, you need to replace those parts because it doesn't take but, a quarter of an inch of movement in a ball joint means that it's about to fall out. So you need to get those things replaced for safety and to pass your state inspection if you live in such a state. This is especially going to be true on your bigger, heavier vehicles like your SUVs and your trucks, because even though they have more beefed up suspension components, they still are heavy and, we tend to haul things, put a bunch of crap in them, tow things. So there's going to be more wear on those parts. You're also going to start having to change some of the your more fancy fluids, I like to call them. Your transmission fluid usually needs to be changed, around 40,000, 30,000 is the Volkswagen, to 50,000 mark. You may need power steering flush, your coolant flush. Some of the things that start to get a little more expensive than your average oil change, but they're extremely important because, again, that's part of your preventative maintenance. Now, as your car gets to that kind of 7 year mark, 7 to 10 years, now it's kind of like when we start getting to be, 50 or 60 years old, more things start to wear out. The biggest thing that you'll see on cars over 7 years old are the seals and gaskets. Those are all the little rubber parts that sit between all of the metal parts in your car. A lot of people don't know what the difference is between a seal and gasket. So here's a real easy explanation. They kind of do the same thing, but a gasket is also called a static seal. Gaskets, they're used to prevent the leakage of fluid between two metal components that don't have any relative motion to each other. So, for example, your oil pan gasket, that your oil pan and your oil systems they don't move with the car. They stay static. So they have a gasket between them, and that prevents the leakage of the oil between those components. Now, a seal is also called a dynamic seal, and that's used to prevent leakage between two moving parts within your car. So it's a gasket if it's between two static parts. It's a seal if it's between two moving parts. But it's all little rubber parts. And what happens to rubber as it ages through time and also through heat cycling, heating up and then cooling down, heating up and cooling down with your car running and stopping, that rubber dries out and becomes very brittle over time. So you may need to start replacing those. As they get brittle and break down, they no longer prevent the fluids from leaking out of the parts. So you may see some oil leaks. You may see some drops of oil on your garage floor. Your mechanic may notice it when they do an oil change and inspect your car. This is normal as your car ages, and you have to go ahead and replace those seals and gaskets. When that happens is kind of a crapshoot. It depends on the manufacturer, the make and model of the car, how religious you have been about changing the fluids in your car, and how much heat cycling your car has been through. I recently just redid a whole bunch of seals and gaskets on my little Mini Cooper Maggie. Now, Maggie's a 2004, so she's 14 years old. She is an older car. I have relatively low miles. I only have 115,000 miles on her because my office is in my house. But when we took apart the car to change all these seals and gaskets, one of the old gaskets literally broke apart and just kind of crumbled in our hands when we took it out. It's like, oh, okay, that was really not doing its job. No wonder I had an oil leak on the garage floor. So if you see an oil leak, little droplets of oil on your garage floor, that means that there is a seal or gasket somewhere in your car that is not happy. And it's not something to mess with, because if those seals and gaskets really fail and you lose the fluid out of your car, then you're going to start having, your engine's going to blow up, something really, really bad is going to happen. So while the repairs to replace these seals and gaskets can be very expensive due to the labor hours, simply because replacing the seals and gaskets, they're between these, two important parts in your car. Some of them are really hard to get to, and you have to disassemble half the car to get to them. So that's why, depending on what make and model car you have and how it is put together, replacing, say, a rear main seal may involve removing the entire transmission, like on a Toyota Sequoia. So, that can be, a $1,500 repair bill, even though the gasket itself is like $35 because it takes 10 labor hours just to get everything disassembled. That's why those tend to be expensive. Now, as your car gets even older, Maggie, as I said, is 14 years old. That's considered starting to get geriatric. Now, she has relatively low miles, so not so bad. But as the car starts to get into these geriatric years, you may start to see a lot of body and electrical related issues. Your power components may fail, things like the window motor regulators. Of course, Maggie's went out before she reached 25,000 miles, but that was covered under warranty. The radio may start to get wonky. The sunroof motor may stop working. The wiring harness for your car, kind of depending on the conditions your car has lived in and the quality of the wiring in the first place, the wiring harness itself may start to degrade. Now, you hope it won't, but I have certainly seen it happen, and you get some wonky things going on. Maggie's got a wonky thing on her oil pressure light, just randomly comes on and then goes off and on and off and on and off, and that's been driving me crazy for years, but it's due to a short in the wiring for the dash, that whole instrument cluster. And I'm just, I don't feel like ripping the entire car apart to replace that. It will be expensive. It will be time consuming. And I know that light has a problem, and I have workarounds for, testing my oil pressure. But, these things can be annoying. They may or may not be catastrophic. Now, I did have a wiring harness problem in one of our old minivans. It was a 96 Dodge Caravan that my in-laws owned. And it just, all of a sudden, you'd be driving down the street and all of a sudden the whole car would just lose power. All electricity gone. And that cuts out the car. It happened to me, of course, in the middle of a left-hand turn in a controlled intersection. And all of a sudden I lose steering ability in the middle of this turn. That was a little scary. And we found out that it was the wiring harness had just degraded over time, and there was no fix for that because they didn't make the wiring harness anymore. So we ended up having to scrap that car, which sucked because it was mechanically, it was a totally perfect car. It worked great. So some of those things can be, really annoying, and there may not be a fix for them. You may also start to see kind of some of the plastic body parts. My mom has an old 2003 Toyota Corolla, and the plasticky parts, that make up the interior of the car, particularly around her windows, that's starting to crack. It's starting to pull away in places. Your car is put together with a lot of glue. And over time, that glue also starts to break down and loses its gluiness. And so you may start to see panels cracking. The plastic or the leather or vinyl on your dash may start to crack just because it's getting old and it's been baking in the sun for all these years. So you may start seeing those kind of degradations. Those are kind of like, wrinkles on our bodies. It just happens as we age. The headliner, the glue that glues in your headliner may start to come off. And that's happening in our '05 Dodge minivan. The headliner's starting to drop. So you get in the car and, this headliner piece is kind of falling down and hits you in the head. And, we're going to have to replace the headliner in that. I'm starting to see little tiny places in Maggie where her headliner is starting to pull away. It kind of looks like a one of those pops out in your drywall from the drywall nails or screws, whatever those are. These are things that unfortunately are just a reality as the car gets into its geriatric years. And that's not to say that it means that, the car needs to be put out to pasture. We have a 1992 Toyota in our family, and the car's in great shape. Cosmetically, she doesn't look so great. But mechanically, I could jump in that car and drive across the country tomorrow and not worry about a thing because she has been very, very well maintained. But we have replaced all the seals and gaskets, really refreshed the car, and been religious about our maintenance. So I hope this gives you some ideas of what to expect as your car ages, or what to expect in additional money you may need to put into a used car that you decide to purchase if it has a few more miles and years on it than a brand new or certified pre-owned, slightly used car. Let's take a super quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about things that you might be doing to contribute to this aging and making your car age prematurely. Back in 60 seconds. Do you hate car shopping? Do you worry about being taken advantage of, or about finding the right car at a fair price? Buying a car can be a frustrating and time-consuming experience. But what if you could get a great deal without having to do a ton of research, without having to haggle, and without the fear of buying a lemon? You can. As your personal car shopper, the Car Chick will help you pick the perfect car based on your unique lifestyle, budget, and personality. She'll handle all of the legwork and negotiating for you. All you have to do is sign the papers and take the keys. It's that easy. To learn how the Car Chick can save you time, money, and hassle on your next car purchase, give us a call at 888-575-2138. That's 888-575-2138. Or visit us on the web at thecarchick.com.
Where the rubber meets the road.
Nice to meet you. Love your asphalt.
Hey, nice treads.
It's Straight Shift with the Car Chick.
And we're back with the Straight Shift, talking about what to expect as your car ages. And there might be some things, some driving habits, or perhaps your car care habits that are actually contributing to premature aging of your car. Just like with our own bodies, there's nothing we can really do about the passage of time. But a lot of the things that we do, we have some bad habits that make us age faster. Maybe you eat food that is not as good for you, things with too many carbs, things with too much sugar, pretty much anything that actually tastes good is not good for you. That can prematurely age your body. Not exercising enough, maybe you drink too much, or you smoke, you work too much, you don't get enough sleep, you sit at a desk all day like I do, and your body gets all sore because you're too stubborn or, busy to get up and stretch and move around. All of these things contribute to the premature or accelerated aging of our bodies. There are things that you are probably doing in your car that are doing the same thing to the car. So here are some bad habits or just choices that you're making that may be prematurely aging your car. Number one is just not doing the proper maintenance, not changing your oil frequently enough, not changing the other fluids like your transmission, your power steering fluids, or putting the wrong fluids in your car to start with, the wrong type of oil, or putting regular gasoline in the car when your car calls for the premium gasoline. You think you're saving some money, but what you're actually doing is damaging your engine, which is going to cost you a whole heck of a lot more further down the line. So be sure that you are being very, very meticulous in your maintenance and putting the right stuff in it, and that you've got a good mechanic, obviously, that you trust, that is a good quality mechanic taking care of your vehicle. Something that people tend to do up north, folks that live in wintry zones, sometimes people do it down here as well, is warming up your car or just otherwise kind of leaving it idling. Maybe you're, running into the house. I do this sometimes when I've, realized I've forgotten something and I have to turn around and come back, and I just leave the car running and I run into the house and I grab whatever I forgot. Today's engines, they have enough lubrication in them that they don't need to be warmed up. So if you live in the north and it's cold and it's wintry, and I know you may want to turn on the car so that it warms up for you when you get in, that I totally get. But just leaving your car idling like that, engines are not designed to idle for long periods of time, and idling can create a buildup of gunk on your spark plugs. That makes them less efficient. It wastes gas. So unless you really need to warm up the car because it's, 15 degrees outside or lower, or I used to live in Wisconsin, it would get down to 20, 30 below sometimes, and you just kind of want to get into a car that's not completely frozen solid, I totally get that. But be aware that that kind of idling is not necessarily good for your engine. If you have a relatively newer car, it's also not necessary for the engine. Just a couple of minutes of while you're getting your seatbelt on and getting the radio set and kind of getting settled in the car is enough time for the engine to get, quote, warmed up, and you can drive it safely. You do not need to let it warm up for 5 minutes before you drive it. It's hard on the engine and it wastes gas. Another thing that people tend to do is not maintain their tires. People don't think about tire maintenance. It's just you drive the car and when you run out of tread, you buy new tires. But there's actually some maintenance involved with the tires that can increase their life so that you're not buying tires prematurely. Driving a car with improperly inflated tires, meaning that the tire pressure is a little bit too low, that wastes fuel for one thing, but it also wears down the tread on your tires faster because when the air pressure is lower, there's more of that rubber tire in contact with the road, creating friction and rubbing off that tread. So that's why it's so important to make sure that your tires are properly inflated. It's also a safety issue because you don't want to blow out. And you want to make sure that the alignment on your car is proper and correct so that your tires are wearing evenly. People have different driving styles. And so it's not uncommon, especially on German cars or higher performance cars, that they may have, a little bit of camber, which means the tires tilt in ever so slightly to increase the turning performance of the car. If you don't know what that means, don't worry about it. But it also probably means that if you have one of these cars, you are wearing out the inside edges of your tire faster than the outsides of your tire, which is why your mechanic should be checking your tread depth on all 3 places, the outside, the middle, and the inside of your tires. Because you may look at your tire and you're just seeing the outside of the tread and seeing, oh, it looks like I have plenty of tread. But on the inside, the dang thing is bald. We recently got Maggie up on the lift when we were doing all this seals and gasket changing and noticed that my right front tire, I knew all my tires were getting low and it was about time to suck it up and call Michelin and replace them. But the right front tire, it was bald in the middle. And I have a lot of camber on my wheels because I corner very aggressively, and both on the track and on the street. As a result, I don't wear my brakes at all, but I do wear the tires. But this one tire had a very different wear pattern than the rest of the tires. And we couldn't figure out why initially. And then we realized, oh, that's the tire, the front inside tire that I spin coming out of certain turns on the track because I have an open differential. Don't worry if you don't know what that means. It's a racing thing. My racing buddies will know what it means. But what it translates to is that my driving style means that I was wearing that one tire, and it was wearing more on the center than it should have been. There's really nothing I can do about that unless I change my driving style, which, not going to happen. So, but be aware your mechanic should be looking at these things. And if you don't have your car properly aligned, both for the car and for your driving, you may be wearing part of the tire faster instead of wearing it more evenly. The more evenly a tire wears, the longer it's going to last, and then you won't have to replace it quite as often. So because I have 2 rear tires that are still okay, I could probably, get at least another 6 months out of them. But the right front is worn badly. I'm just going to replace all of them, and, it's just a little premature, but is what it is. So be aware and practice good tire maintenance. Another thing that can prematurely age your car, it can also get you a good ticket, is driving too fast. Now, we all know that I am guilty of this. But, driving too much above the speed limit, in addition to being very risky, you not only get a ticket, but you could get injured or even killed or kill somebody else. So be careful. But driving faster, for most people, forces them to brake harder and faster and more abruptly. A lot of time because they're not anticipating their driving. And that's going to take a toll both on your tires, because as you brake, your tires are what stop the car, not the brakes. The brakes stop the wheels from rotating, but the tire and the friction patch between the tire and the road is what actually brings your vehicle to a stop. So that wears out your tires faster, and it wears out your brakes faster. So, driving a little more, I'm not going to say gingerly or grandmotherly, obviously, but just driving a little more responsibly and less crazy race car-y like I do will actually increase the life of your tires and in many cases your brakes. Now, driving fast does not wear my brakes because I hardly ever use them because I have a Mini with a lot of camber. So when I have to make a turn, I just downshift and dump her into the turn. We actually found that my brakes, which are just normal original equipment Mini Cooper brakes, they last about 4 years on the street and exactly 26 minutes on the track. So that gives you an idea of how harder braking and more abrupt braking will wear your brakes down faster. I have a different set of tires for the track for this very reason, because otherwise I would go through my Michelins way too fast. So if you're doing some of this on the streets, you may be wearing your brakes and your tires faster than you might need to. Riding your brakes. Oh, there's always somebody, that we get behind who is riding their brakes. And we can tell who you are because your brake lights are kind of flickering for no good reason. And it's because you've got a foot hovering over the brake. From a driving safety standpoint, driving with a foot hovering over the brake, especially if you're a 2-foot driver in an automatic transmission car, there's nothing wrong with that so long as you are not lazily resting that left foot on the brake pedal. If you do the brake hovering technique, you got to make sure that your foot doesn't touch that brake. It hovers over the brake. But a lot of people ride their brakes, whether they're doing it with 2 feet or just 1 foot, and that wears out the brakes and drives everybody behind you crazy. The same thing is true of the clutch for all of my 3-pedal divas out there and anybody else who drives a car with what I call a proper transmission and you have 3 pedals. So one of the bad habits of manual transmission drivers is some of them ride the clutch. They kind of rest their foot on the clutch. They keep it partially engaged. That will wear the clutch out a lot faster. And replacing your clutch is a complicated and expensive fix. Maggie's clutch is starting to show some wear on it finally. I mean, she's 14 years old with 115,000 miles, and she has spent a certain amount of time at the racetrack. So honestly, I'm surprised that my clutch has lasted this long, but I also have really good clutching technique on the road because all I've ever driven is a manual transmission since I was 15 years old. So just be aware, don't ride your brake, don't ride your clutch. It will keep those components lasting a lot longer and save you money. Finally, baking your car. And what I mean by baking is leaving your car out in the sun and exposing it to sunlight and heat. Maybe you don't have a garage at home or a carport to keep your car under. You're in an apartment, your house doesn't have a garage. Maybe where you park your car at work, they don't have a covered parking deck, and you just have no choice but to leave your car parked out in the sun. Sometimes there's nothing we can do about that. What that does is it can bake the inside of your car. It will cause your leather seats to dry out and age prematurely. So to combat that, you need to get a good detail of your car periodically and have the detailer, or if you want to do it yourself, treat the leather, condition it. Same thing is true of your dashboard. If you've been in some older cars, you see the dash cracking. It's literally cracking and baking like the ground in Arizona in the desert because it is so hot that all the moisture seeps out and everything cracks. So something that can really help, honestly, the interior of your car, and it will keep it from being super duper hot when you get in it at the end of the day, is one of those silly cardboard sunshades. The goofy ones that look like sunglasses or that have eyeballs on the front. They look utterly ridiculous, but kind of fun. However, that's a really inexpensive way to not only keep your car a little bit cooler so that it doesn't bake you when you get in it, but it helps protect the interior of your car. And you just fold it up and throw it in the back seat or stick it in the boot or the trunk, when you're not using it for, $20, $30. It's a great investment for helping prevent the premature aging of the interior of your car. So I hope that this has been helpful, that I've given you some tips on what to understand and expect as your car ages or when you buy a used car, and some things you should do and definitely not do so that your car doesn't age prematurely. This is not about vanity. Well, partly about vanity. You want your car to look nice, but it's about saving you money and not having to do extra maintenance and repairs that you don't need to. Let's not throw money down the drain when we don't have to. So folks, take care of your cars and take care of your own bodies too, because it's a lot easier to replace parts on cars than it is on people. So take care of yourself and your car and drive safely. Until next time.
The Straight Shift Podcast is copyright Leanne Shattuck, The Car Chick, 2017. All views expressed by guest and or co-hosts are those of the guest and or co-hosts, and not necessarily those of Leanne Shattuck or The Car Chick.